Today, we're going to talk about how to value a house in Austin, Texas in 2023. I don't know about you, but I've seen a lot of sellers or would-be sellers who have misconceptions about what their house is worth. Anybody who's thinking about buying their house is going to get advice from somebody, but it's a question of how do you know if you're getting good advice or bad advice?
Or not.
I mean, have you seen anybody who thinks their house is worth more than it actually sells for in this current market?
Yes, quite a few, because what if they're working off old information,
right,
and they hear the market's adjusting, but maybe they don't quite really understand what the adjustment means.
Let's try to explain our perception of how that market is adjusting, because this is the kind of information that somebody really needs to have if they legitimately want to sell their house.
They need to get really granular about what the sales patterns in their homes in their last 30, 60, 90 days, and look at that with their trusted advisor. The comps only tell you where the market was, so that's the most challenging part. It doesn't tell you where it's going to go.
Where it's going to go, right.
That's the most difficult part. You now have to kind of look at what are the active properties and how am I going to compete with. It's almost, I wish I could take some of my sellers and have them go see some of the houses I could see, because what if their home doesn't have updates or countertops?
If you're looking at houses in a certain neighborhood, for the most part, there's going to be a lot of similarities, and it really doesn't matter how old those houses might be. But there is a distinct difference between the upgrades or the interior finishes. A house that was built in the 90s is definitely going to look like the 90s if they still have the same kitchen cabinets, the countertops, the bathroom. If someone spent some money and upgraded it, kind of refreshed it, it's somewhat common sense, but I think a lot of people fail to grasp that when you're comparing a house in the same neighborhood, there can't, even if it might be the same floor plan, there can be differences in the value of that house.
I talked to an agent the other day, and he had a couple different clients. One client, the house was built in the mid-70s, and it was in pristine condition. Nothing was changed and updated. It was one of those rare circumstances where the seller kept it clean. It looked so cool, it looked like a time capsule.
Right.
And then you come across properties that floors have been done, roof, mechanical, structural, those things, and it's noticeable. And consumers are willing to pay a price for some of those.
It's a very rare buyer who wants to do their own work. The idea about, I want to go to Home Depot and I'm going to do it. Most buyers want that move-in ready house.
Absolutely. Most buyers, as you just said, want the move-in ready house. They have more money than time. They're willing to say, I'm willing to pay X amount because I know, and these buyers now have the luxury of seeing more inventory in the market, so they're able to do a little more homework. There's not as much pressure on them to put offers on. So you asked about how do we value a home? You know, carefully, you look at the comparables. We're lucky in Austin, Texas. If we were like, say, in Michigan, they have areas, large areas and counties, they don't have a lot of comps to pull from. We generally have a bunch of comparatives to pull from. We're fortunate, especially if you're in like a subdivision.
Yes. Those
now
are much
it changes
easier.
a little bit if you're like in a condo or something, but for the most part, you have really good information, and the information always tells a story.
If you are in areas of the metro where there is land that can be developed, that is in the process of being developed, oftentimes you're going to have an older, not necessarily 50 years old, but an older neighborhood versus a brand new community. And when builders are able to adjust their pricing to match the market, you really have to have the right expectations. Is that why would you think that your 10-year-old house is the same or more than a brand new?
It's the truth. It can be humbling.
What I'm going to call an example of the type of advice that a seller can get that can distort their view of the market. I don't know if you've heard the name, but I will say his name in this video. It's Mark Sprague at Independent's Title, because I've seen him quoted on a number of different publications.
Yes, he's
Let me put
bright.
this quote up so we can actually see his thinking on this. He talks in terms of the sales prices have dropped, but only because rates have gone up, which is understandable.
Understandable.
Right? But here's what I'm getting at. Look at this last sentence. The values of the local real estate have not gone down. The consumer can just buy less to the loss of buying power. Therefore, median values drop. The definition, at least my definition, of market value is what that house will sell for in today's market.
Yes.
Is that an accepted definition?
Yes, what a buyer is willing and able to pay, actually given no duress. Now, what's interesting is sometimes there's lack of supply, and that adds a little pressure.
True.
For the most part, those pressures have kind of gone away. This is not 2021, 2022 when there's insane pressure.
If I, and I've encountered these types of conversations, if I as a potential seller am looking at what my neighbor sold the house for a year and a half ago, I'm looking at my tax appraisal that tells me my house is, worth 50% more than it was just 3 years ago.
That is so true.
That's going to play a role in my perception of that value. But if I adopt the mindset like this Mr. Sprague says, right, the values are still the same. But if I put that on the market, I'm not going to see that kind of offer come in. And the reason I bring this up because I think it's important to clarify that if we're talking about current market value, it is buyer driven. It's whether they've got high interest rates or not. What are they willing to pay?
It's what are they willing to pay? Buyers have good information, and the sellers are getting into the game realizing how can we make our home more attractive, better, and they can do that by really there's a couple things the seller can control: presentation, how it looks, how they prepare it. You can't change location, and they can control the price. They can't control the market. So out of the four things, two things they can control: price it well within a reasonable value, and then make the condition really good. You do those things and you're giving yourself a much better chance of success.
The best way to gauge values is what are the builders pricing their houses at. That only works in the areas where you have a choice, right? Whether it be 10, 20 years old versus brand new. Because in the case of the builder, there's no emotional attachment.
Not at all.
Is that they're running a business. Now, they're not going to sell them at a loss.
No.
But there typically is some type of headroom in there.
I'll give you for an example that hits exactly on this point. There's a builder that's building in one of our local southern areas. And not only is the builder giving about a 20 grand flex incentive, their lender's giving another 11 grand, so they have lenders involved. I am seeing some sellers offer mortgage buy down still and what have you to help, but a builder does that a lot easier, and they have that built into their margins, and they really want to sell those homes.
Absolutely. We talk a lot about the transformation, whether it be north central or east or even south, of all the development where they tear down the 1950 house, build the brand new one, right?
Yes.
The multi-million.
Oh yeah.
Have you ever considered the percentage of houses in those areas that have not been touched? I know over in East Austin, where there's probably the most, like in the Holly area, about 25%.
25%?
Have a newer build, which means 75% of those houses look the same as they did in 1940. The question is again assessing values. As long as people continue to want to build those houses, there's going to be a demand.
I think you hit it right on the head. The demand is strong because they're wanting to build the houses where they're closer to the center of Austin.
Yes.
That the statistics back that up and show it. And again, these folks make a lot more than the average Texan do, and they're coming with high-tech jobs.
Right.
They are willing to pay more to be closer into Austin,
right,
even to tear something down and rebuild it.
Right. Maybe what I'm getting at is part of that is driven by anticipation of continued demand in certain areas. Use the example of the Facebook tower, where they were originally going to rent the entire building. Now it's entirely subleased. Google's reducing their space here. Now I know they're not the only employers. There's still a lot of positives happening, but that could have a huge impact on the qualification of the buyers to buy, the types of houses they're looking for, and ultimately the value of the homes in those areas that they were so highly sought after. I think the best way to get a realistic assessment of value is to contact one of us, and we can sit down and give you a...
Oh, there's no doubt.
Do you charge anything for a CMA if someone
Not at
have
all.
a conversation?
That's the most interesting thing is I don't get paid until I help my clients succeed, which is if their goal is to sell.
Right.
I don't get paid until they
accomplish that goal.
Until they accomplish that goal. Now we as real estate agents, we compete, but until we collaborate with each other, houses don't get sold.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So it's a collaboration of pricing it well, and our job is to make it attractive for the buyers and consumers. What I'm also seeing is if you create really good value, consumers are contacting their agents first and saying, let's go see the house. Consumers are coming out of the woodwork when they see value.
When they see the value, correct. All right. Well, on that note then, thank you again for taking time to kind of help us understand more about the values in the Austin market, and we'll talk again soon.